The London Chess Classic started with 16 players, but on the final day there were just 4 left standing. In the 2 semi-finals we had Vladimir Kramnik playing against Hikaru Nakamura, and in the other semi-final Boris Gelfand was playing against Michael Adams. So all 4 players, real rapid play specialists. So let's have a look at that semi-final between Gelfand and Adams. They first played over 25 years ago, and they've played so many times since then. But Gelfand has always had a pretty good record against Adams. Let's see how they're getting on in this first of their 2-game match. Gelfand has the white pieces. Things have gone very well for Michael Adams, actually. You can see he has a very active rook here. This bishop is looking at the pawn here. Now, white's pieces for the moment are quite good, but of course the big problem is that this king has yet to castle. But, you know, maybe Adams should play something like g6 here and just improve the position of his king, and then perhaps at some moment just attempt to exchange off this knight, and then this pawn will be weakened. Let's see what happened. Adams tried to exchange off that knight straight away, but this was a terrible blunder. There's a beautiful trick. Castles queenside, hitting the rook and at the same time attacking the knight on d7. It's one of those tactics that you see in puzzle books but somehow never appears in your own games. Well, it appeared in this one. Maybe Adams simply forgot that the king could still castle. Maybe he thought the king had moved already. Incredible that he overlooked this, actually. I mean, it's an unusual tactic, but relatively easy to see. Anyway, it's a rapid play game. Anything can happen. There was a way out for Adams. He could just ditch the exchange. That's what he did. And in fact, he has 1 pawn for the exchange. And, well, for example, Vishy Anand, who was spectating this, said, well, this should just be a draw, because black has a pawn, but also, crucially, that bishop has an excellent outpost in the middle of the board, looking all around the board, and white is unable to exchange off black's rook. If white can do that, then good winning chances, but here, black should hold. Now, let's see what happened. I mean, both players by this stage running pretty short of time. Adams plays very actively indeed. Now, in principle, I think this is a good idea, but it's incredible how Gelfand, first of all, managed to somehow generate winning chances here. First of all, he's creating a passed pawn on the king side, so you can see this one's under attack, so Adams really has to exchange, and now the h-pawn is running through. But now Gelfand finds himself under real pressure. But very interesting to see how he dealt with the pressure. So Adams advances his own pawn majority, and you can see he has this beautifully compact position in the centre of the board. And this is dangerous. White's king is going to come under a terrible attack. Gelfand pushed his pawn. I mean, both players playing very courageously here. And now you can see the king is coming under fire. What black would like to do is play bishop e4, here, and then perhaps pawn to f3, and that would enable the king to come in, and he sets up a mating net. And you can see the rooks are just kind of the other side of the board. You know, I think this might not be a bad move to start off with. And this is a very serious threat for white. Now, I think white can defend. Probably he should give back the exchange like this. And I suspect this position will be a draw. Black has to be a little bit careful, but should be a draw. Instead, Adams started with this move, but this allowed this check, and you can see the king can't move forward, has to go backwards. And from this moment, although Adams is still in the game, I feel things went wrong. Both players short of time. Fantastic defence from Gelfand, shifting his king out, allowing this rook to come back. I mean, it's pretty unusual, actually, and very delicate defence, but works very well. Here, maybe black should try bishop f5. Adams came back, And now this move, that's why perhaps the king should have stayed on e5. After this move, rook d4, hitting, well, everything along the fourth rank, Adams is lost. And these final few moves, well, nothing changes really. The king can escape. The danger has passed for white, and suddenly it's all over. He's taken one pawn, he's taking another, and now the rook moves in, threatening a pawn, but more crucially threatening a deadly check on g7, and Adams resigned. So Gelfand won this first game, and actually in the second game didn't have too many problems. Outplayed Adams actually, although the game eventually ended in a draw. But anyway, Gelfand went through to the final. Now let's have a look at the second semi-final between Nakamura and Kramnik. The first game was drawn. This is the position in the second game where things have gone very well for Kramnik. He has a rook against a knight. Nakamura has this pawn on d6, but Kramnik has this under control, and this is, as they say, just a matter of technique. Well, let's see Kramnik's technique. You'll remember the other day that Nakamura had a similar situation against Short, actually, where Short also had a passed pawn. It was on c6 and protected by a bishop on this diagonal. This one ought to present few problems for black. He should be able to scoop up that pawn. Let's see how the players played. So, knight d2. Trying to swing this knight round to create some kind of difficulties. Now, it's not so simple to scoop up this pawn. We would like to play a move like f5. Drive the knight away. Well, if white manages to take one of these pawns, then he has good drawing chances. But, for example, here, black can take this pawn. But this is where the difficulties start. In fact, white has just enough time. You can see it's not possible to take straight away because of the tricky knight coming with a knight fork. But actually, I mean, this is very typical. White's king can come in, and black's king, if the black king were on to f6 to stop white's king coming in, that would be different. But you can see in this position, white has some kind of fortress, or let's say just enough pressure on g6, and should be able to draw that position. So this is the kind of thing that Kramnik must be wary of. And also lots of other tricks. For example, if he plays here hoping to play f5, then white can take, and you can see that there's a nasty fork here, and black could even lose. That pawn goes through. I mean, it's so tricky, such a tricky position. But, well, black doesn't need to rush it, so it seems as though Kramnik still has everything under control. Let's see what happens. He's slowly creeping forward, wants to drive the knight away. And now Nakamura came up with an extraordinary idea. He pushed the pawn on, and remarkably, black cannot scoop up this pawn very easily. If you take here, then there's this trick here, because the pawn will be on prise, so black will draw that. Or if rook takes, again there's a knight fork here. In fact, there does seem to be a clear winning move here, and that's to drop the bishop back, covering this square, and in that case we should be able to pick up the pawn. But when you're short of time, very, very difficult to see this. Kramnik played here, and incredibly this is a mistake. It looked as though he's just going to win this pawn, but Nakamura finds some extraordinary ideas. First of all, the knight came here to protect the pawn. You can't take because the pawn goes through. The bishop came here, attacking the knight. Seems as though everything is fine. Bishop here, threatening to queen, so the bishop had to stop that. And now, incredibly, white manages to hold everything. These pieces protect each other, and the king can't approach the pawn because these squares are covered. It's quite extraordinary. And you can attack the bishop, but it just moves away. So, remarkably, Nakamura has found, with these delicate manoeuvres, some kind of fortress. Now, Kramnik tried valiantly to sort of stir the position up in some way, but he just couldn't break this down. Now, I'm just going to move forward fairly quickly in the game. I mean, really, Kramnik is making no real progress here, and his time was running right down to the wire. So he was getting increasingly frustrated. You know, he's exchanging off pawns, but this doesn't really help his cause. Nakamura just waiting, but now he's in. The knight suddenly plays to this tricky square. If knight takes, then we have another knight fork. I mean, knights in rapid play are deadly pieces. So by this point, things have gone terribly wrong for Kramnik. This will be winning for white, incredibly, and the bishop comes back and holds everything. So suddenly we've got a situation where two minor pieces against a rook. Actually, white has some winning chances here, but demoralised, Kramnik blew it completely. He should move his king back. Instead, he played to this square and incredibly allowed this deadly pin. And he resigned the game. He'll just be end up a piece down. Terrible. So Nakamura went through. So we were faced with a final between Hikaru Nakamura and Boris Gelfand. Let me go through this one pretty quickly. It was this is the first game, a very sharp Grunfeld, Gelfand, a Grunfeld expert, and here this very tricky variation. The white queen has come out early, which is risky in itself, but black counterattacks. White has this huge pawn centre pushing through. This move, knight g5, was actually first introduced by Magnus Carlsen about 3 years ago, and it's very tricky indeed. You can see that white is starting a very crude attack on this point. Let me get through to the critical moment. Well, this is all critical actually. Gelfand took this knight, and with this, of course, Nakamura is winning material. If the rook moves, then there's a discovered check. So Gelfand has to give up the rook. Now, for the moment, it looks dreadful for black. What's he doing? You know, this pawn has come down the board. He's an exchange down. But in fact, because of this very well-placed knight in the middle of the board, in fact, black is doing absolutely fine here. And this is a very typical Grunfeld position where these bishops rake across the board. So-called Botvinnik bishops are very common in the Grunfeld. So black has excellent compensation for the exchange. Now here is really a crunch moment. Black looks to be building up very nicely indeed, and Nakamura invested a lot of time here. He was about 5 minutes down on the clock. Natural moves like bishop e2, you want to play bishop e2 and get castled, of course. But this runs into, well, a very simple trade actually. There's going to be a deadly check on this square, and if white exchanges, the knight comes in anyway, the rook comes across, and now you can take this pawn here. And in this situation where black has two pawns for and a bishop against a rook, I mean, this bishop pair is absolutely fantastic. Black stands very well in this position. So you can see when normal moves don't work, then Nakamura had to be creative. He tried this move, which looks really bizarre because this is pretty loose in itself. And now maybe Gelfand should have played this move, just supporting this knight in the middle of the board, and this still looks quite promising. Instead, he played his knight into the middle, but this allowed exchanges, and this certainly benefits Nakamura, who really needs to ease the pressure on his position. And now the king will find a pretty safe square here. And this is not simple. Now things turned round because suddenly Gelfand finds it difficult to find a plan. You know, he's got his pieces out, but what do you do next with black? White has some security here. And, well, when we were looking at this game, I was commentating with Peter Svidler, And he thought just rook d7, just holding everything, would be the way to go. Instead, Gelfand played the queen over. Now, obviously he's looking to somehow hassle White's king. I think he'd forgotten that this move was possible. And suddenly White has threats here. Now, the problem for him is that there's no decent discovered attack. The rook attacks the queen, but White can hold everything together with this move. And suddenly this is very, very difficult for Gelfand. He found himself running short of time, pieces were being exchanged, and really his initiative is drying up. The rook comes into the game. Of course, Nakamura just needs to exchange pieces, and he's doing that very efficiently. So the rook has to keep running. Nice move, securing this pawn chain. Nakamura just locks everything out. I think, you know, after a slightly dubious opening, basically Nakamura has played perfectly, and Gelfand couldn't match it. Now there's a nasty threat to this pawn. Gelfand covered, but Nakamura continues his simple strategy of exchanging pieces. I don't think the rook can move away, because I would say there's at some moment something nasty will occur here. So Gelfand tried to enter with his queen, but now a couple of deft moves from Nakamura. If he plays queen e2, then the queen will just come back and everything seems fine, but instead he played queen here. Now this is very clever, because after this move he can bring his rook back, and he's hitting through here. And again, another very accurate move from Nakamura coming. It looks very tempting to take that pawn on h5 with check, no less. But actually, what do you do next? The king is relatively safe, and suddenly it's black's turn. Instead, Nakamura played queen here, a very tidy move. If the queen checks, you block out, that'll force a queen exchange, White will win easily. Or if, well, again, if the queen exchanges, that's winning for White, the ending. And if the queen comes here, now you play the queen over. And if the queen goes back, you take the pawn in the centre of the board, and that's very, very different, because the queen can cover here to block out White's queen. So basically, after this move, queen f1, it's all over. And Gelfand resigned. Now, that was only the first game of their match, but Nakamura really had few difficulties in the second. So Hikaru Nakamura won the final by 1.5 points to half. The second game was drawn. And he is the London Chess Classic champion of 2013, and winning a first prize of €50,000. Not a bad payday for him. Thanks very much for watching this report and the reports that I've made throughout the tournament. If you're interested in watching more clips, then do subscribe to my Power Play Chess YouTube channel, and there'll be regular clips and videos posted there. Thanks very much for watching.